Hi everyone, and welcome to a quick Civilization 7 video, where I wanted to answer some of the questions I've seen out there, and also under my own videos. So here we go. We are going to talk about the difficulty, actually, because I've seen a lot of questions about the difficulty, and I wanted to talk about my experience with it so far. And just a quick disclaimer, the gameplay in the background is just gameplay from my own preview video. This is not anything new. And if you haven't seen that video, I will link it in the video description. So anyway, difficulty. I've seen a lot of people out there asking how hard the game will be on Deity specifically. And I wanted to talk about that briefly, because while my own preview video is on like Viceroy, I did play on Deity a fair bit already. And first of all, I don't think Deity in Civilization 7 will overall be easier than it was in Civilization 4 and in Civilization 5. However, if you look at the data in Civilization 6, for example, if you remember Civilization 6 on release back in 2016 and even early 2017, data was actually pretty damn easy, and this was partially because the AI back then was doing a lot of stupid things. Some of them got fixed over time. Some of the AI behaviors that were causing data to be pretty easy back on Civilization 6 release were patched. That's not to say it's tremendously hard now, but that is to say it is harder now than it was in late 2016, just after release. So this is also what might happen in Civilization 7. There are a few things the AI has the tendency of doing that I don't think will get adjusted in the future. A good example of that is the AI's tendency to leave their commanders exposed and fairly easy to kill. And the army commander is one of the most important units in Civilization 7. You want to protect them the best you can. So that's one of the things that might get adjusted over time in future patches. Anyway, there are a few specific things I wanted to talk about in regards to difficulty and the data specifically. So one of the things the AI gets on Deity is a very large combat bonus. The AI gets a +8 combat strength bonus. This is with base unit strength being like 20, 30, 40. So this is a very significant combat bonus. And on top of that, when you start a war, or when the AI starts a war, you have the option of spending influence to increase your war support. And the difference in war support will give the opposing party a combat penalty. If your war support is higher than the AI's, the AI will get a combat penalty, and vice versa. So the AI on Deity especially does have the tendency of spending seemingly large amounts of influence to get extra war support when the war starts. So for example, they might get +3 war support, which gives you a -3 combat penalty. This is on top of them getting a +8 combat bonus. So now you are at an 11-point combat strength disadvantage, which is a massive amount of combat strength. Now, I don't know whether the AI just gets a bonus to spending influence on war support. Maybe they get a discount, or maybe they just get more influence naturally, or maybe they just have the tendency to hoard their influence. I don't know for certain, but the end result is mostly the same right now. They have the tendency to spend what you would need to use large amounts of influence for, because spending influence once on war support gives you +1. So then if you want to get +2, you have to spend it twice. If you want to get +3, you have to spend it 3 times, etc. And the cost goes up. So if you want to get +3 or +4, you might have to spend a few hundred influence. And usually, especially early-ish in the game, you will be getting like +15 per turn. So this is a large amount of influence. As another point of reference, in order to fully integrate a neutral city into your empire, so that means from the first step, which is befriending them, which requires influence, to becoming the suzerain a number of turns later, and then spending a large amount of influence to actually integrate that city into your empire, this will generally also cost you at least like 300-ish. This depends on whether you boost the influence on the way to befriend them faster. So what I'm saying here is that the AI seemingly spends a similar amount of influence that would get you an entirely new city from a neutral city when starting wars. Bottom line is, if you're playing on Deity, your units will very likely be at a huge combat strength disadvantage compared to the AI. In fact, this is the biggest combat disadvantage that the human player ever had in a civilization game in terms of actual combat strength. With all that said, if you just wanted to defend, this is still pretty easy, I would say, because defense will always be easier than offense. AI is generally not very good, especially in combat tactics to begin with. And when it comes to actually attacking a well-defended, well-fortified city with smart defense management, the AI will always be at a major disadvantage, so you can make up for that combat difference that way. It is definitely much harder to actually attack an AI city, especially if it's actively defended, which most of the time it will be, because you can get new units pretty quickly, you can buy units. But if you have no plans to just conquer entire empires on Deity, I would say it's not too hard to win a defensive war against the AI, especially if you start your cities in well-defended locations with advantageous terrain, some choke points, and things like that. And obviously this also depends on the map and your starting location. If you're completely surrounded from every direction and the AIs declare multiple wars on you, you will be in trouble. This is another thing I also wanted to comment about briefly. When it comes to combat strength and war support, if you are at war with multiple other AIs and they all boast their war support, the combat disadvantage will stack. So you can get -10, -15, or even -20 on top of the +8 that the AI gets. So what I'm saying here is that this can get out of hand really quickly, and one of the things you definitely want to avoid when playing on higher difficulty levels, this probably applies to Immortal as well, is avoid getting into multiple wars. This won't always be possible, but that brings me to my next point. Influence will be a tremendously important resource in Civilization 7, because not only you can use influence early on in the age to get yourself some free cities. Well, they aren't really free if you have to spend influence on them, but what I'm saying is that you can skip the entire step of recruiting a settler, moving settler across the map, starting a town, etc. You can just take over a neutral city or a city-state or whatever we call these things now. They are basically like the old barbarian clans in Civilization 6. But yeah, as you probably already know, because I talked about it in my previous video, you can completely integrate a neutral city into your empire if you become the suzerain. It does cost a fair bit of influence, but a lot of the time the AI does not seem to focus very hard on doing this, but this varies from game to game. I did have some games where I had some pretty active competition from the AI to take over city-states, but I had other games where they basically completely ignored them. And this was not games on low difficulties. I had a game on Immortal where the AI basically completely ignored the city-states. I had no competition for them. And as you probably know, influence can also be used to counter denunciations. So when the AIs start denouncing you, you can just spend influence and be like, no you don't. So the AI goes, I denounce you. No you don't. Understandable, have a nice day. That's basically the interaction. That's how it goes. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but yeah, you can counter denunciation if you have the influence. Now, that does not mean they can't declare war on you, but they will have a tougher time getting an advantage against you in that war. So having influence can help a lot. And obviously, if they do declare war on you, if you have influence stored, you can spend that influence to get war support for yourself, and either get a slight combat advantage compared to what you would have otherwise, or negate the penalty you would have from the AI boosting their war support. So what I'm really saying here is that when it comes to war and combat specifically, the AI on Deity does have some very significant advantages. I would say bigger advantages than it ever had in previous Civilization games. However, a human playing smart will still overcome the advantages the AI has. And in fact, it's not even that hard to defend yourself if you don't plan to go to an offensive war. You just need to avoid going to war with like 3 or 4 other empires in your game. Now, another thing on Deity, and this was something I noticed pretty quickly when I started testing Deity, the AI does not seem to start with extra settlers on Deity, because it took them until like turn 20 to get their second city, which you can tell from the military milestone points. And the first settler is pretty cheap, so on standard speed, you can get your first town or second city around turn 20-25, which is roughly when I noticed the AI tends to get it on Deity. If they started with extra settlers, they would have had their first town probably like well before turn 10, which I've never seen them do. So that is certainly a good thing. With that said, the AI does seem to get the major yield advantages on Deity. I don't know what the exact bonuses are right now, but as an example, in some of my games, I had AIs on one city before turn 20 getting around 40 science per turn and 40 culture per turn, where I had 10 to 15 on one city. At that stage of the game, it was basically impossible for a human player to have 40 science, 40 culture per turn, with a single city on turn 15. And on Deity at least, the AI seemed to stay ahead in total yields fairly consistently. But at the same time, I would say having a tech or a civic advantage in Civilization 7 is a little bit less important than it was in previous Civilization games. And my general impression of the AI in Civilization 7 is that it's not really smarter because, like I mentioned earlier, I've seen it do plenty of really stupid things. It's just that Civilization 7 as a whole is designed in a way that makes it easier for the AI to handle. So several of the systems in Civilization 7 are designed with the AI in mind, which is a perfectly valid way to design a game. I'm not saying it's not. That is one of the ways you can make the AI seem smarter, to make systems that are easier for the AI to handle. However, there are still several systems in Civilization 7 that there's pretty much no way the AI will handle well. And one of them, for example, are the attribute points. We have multiple attribute trees, and some of them have very powerful bonuses. And the thing about the attribute trees is that in order to really take advantage of these bonuses, you need to be good at seeing the big picture and the long-term goals. And the AI will never be nearly as good as a human player in a game as complex as Civilization 7 at seeing the big picture. This is where the human always has a significant advantage. So that's one of the areas of the game where a human will be able to optimize it much more efficiently. With that said, if Deity ends up being too easy for long-time veteran players of Civilization, people who played past Civilization games on Deity, especially like Civilization 4, which was pretty brutal on Deity, I'm sure mods will take care of that. Because obviously Civilization 7 is moddable, and you can just make difficulties that will be even harder than Deity through mods. And obviously it would probably be better if the game included difficulties that are just as challenging as in the old Civ games out of the box. But at least in my opinion, I don't think that is the case. At least there's no way Deity in Civ 7 is nearly as hard as Deity was back in Civilization 4. Or I would say even Civilization 5. Personally, I would probably compare it to Civilization 6. In different ways. In some specific areas of the game, the AI in Civ 7 is in fact better, especially on Deity. But again, This is partially a function of the way the game systems are designed. But in other areas, the human will have a major advantage. So take that as you will. And obviously everything I'm saying here is just my impressions and my opinion, in case that wasn't obvious. But I figured I'll say that to make it clear. And it's entirely possible that I'm wrong. Another thing I noticed is that the AI doesn't seem to be very good, even on Deity, at handling some types of crisis. Because you get a crisis when you hit 70% age progress, and then it escalates at 80% and 90%. And the AI did not seem to be very good at handling some types of them, because there's more than one type, and it's random which crisis you get. You can also turn it off during game setup. But if you don't turn it off, yeah, but I've definitely noticed the AI struggling in some cases during the crisis, even on Deity. Anyway, I think that's all I really wanted to say for this video. So thanks for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate it. If you're interested in more Civilization 7 videos, well, subscribe and keep an eye on the channel. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.